Right, ladies and gentlemen, actually a really important day for the news. And this is the news that an Afrikaans delegation went to the United States in order to negotiate with the Trump administration in order to see if they can rectify the trade situation with South Africa. And actually they managed to do what the South African government so far have not been able to do. And that's actually get a clear indication from the United States what they actually want from South Africa. And so before I tell you or give my commentary on it, here's the actual clip. This is the press release that they issued after the meeting. Here it is.
Today the delegation had a very important meeting at the White House with senior staff. It was a very frank meeting in which very important issues were discussed and a very important statement was issued.
The White House demands that farm attacks and farm murders be classified priority crimes. They also demand that the ANC publicly distances itself from kill the farmer, kill the Boer.
The White House also demanded that expropriation of any property only takes place subject to fair compensation being paid and only once all legal processes has been exhausted. The White House also demanded that American companies be exempted from all black economic empowerment legislation.
So this Afrikaans delegation met top White House officials, and the parties who they met was the Office of the Vice President, the National Security Council, and the Homeland Security Council. The meeting took place in Washington, D.C. on the 25th of June, 2025. So these were some really high hitters. In any case, the Trump administration gave 4 preconditions for the normalization of relationships between South Africa and the United States. And the 4 conditions that they gave were as follows. They said, farm attacks must be classified as a priority crime. They must be treated with urgency and resourced comparably to rhino poaching and cash in transit heists, with each case being investigated by the Hawks. That's a really big escalation because, as you will recall, the South African government says that farm attacks or farm murders are not priority crimes. They're just ordinary crime. Even though in many instances the crime occurs to a much greater horrific degree than your average crime. Next thing that they asked is that the South African government condemn the Kill the Boer chant, and that is a clear, public, and unequivocal condemnation by the ANC of the chant, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, in any context. Now, this is important because when in the White House, Ramaphosa was asked whether he actually likes the statement, he says, no, not at all. But when he got back to South Africa and he was asked by the media, he said, well, it's free expression, and that had been ruled by the Constitutional Court. So he kind of backtracked on what he said to Donald Trump. Well, here, the Trump administration is saying, you must denounce the chant. The next is that no expropriation without compensation will occur. Land expropriation must only occur with fair market compensation. All legal avenues must be exhausted beforehand. And this in itself is actually a really interesting thing, because what it's attempting to do is stop land grabs, which by the way are occurring anyway, even without the EWC law in place. But there are some who argue that fair market compensation can still be nil, because the fair market compensation of an actual piece of land that's been completely destroyed, or a building, let's say for a building in the middle of CPD that's been taken over by, I don't know, Nigerians and has been gutted. Well, that building actually doesn't have a value, nor does the land, because the actual cost to demolish it would exceed the cost of the land and the building. So in that instance, you could effectively do forms of land expropriation with fair market compensation, but fair market compensation being nil. So potentially that's still allowed. And theoretically, that's supposedly, by some suggestions, exactly what the current EWC law allows. The final issue is that U.S. entities, specifically U.S. entities, must not be subjected to BEE, Black Economic Empowerment regulations. So these regulations must not apply to any American business. So this is any race-based regulation which the United States says they see as being a tariff trade barrier, which I suppose in a way they do because they increase the costs, so they actually act as kind of a tariff because they aren't using things at fair market value. They're incurring additional costs to the entity itself. Well, those trade barriers, as they see it, must be waived for all U.S. entities. I'm going to be honest and say, yes, that's a nice start. I think many of us would like to see BE replaced across the board in South Africa, not just to United States-based entities, but I suppose as a start. So will the South African government go for this? Well, the actual delegations were made up with Corne Mulder, who's the Freedom Front Plus leader, and let us not forget that he's actually in the GNU. So that's an interesting feature in itself. It's also made up of the executive chairman of SAAI, and it was also made up of the CEO of the NEASA. So were these parties able to actually secure something? Well, it's a steer. It's a steer, and everything will now be in the place of the South African government to determine how they're going to promote it going forward. So at least we have expectations. The US officials have expressed frustrations and concerns that repeatedly the things that they're saying to the South African government are ignored. And this is true. The South African government does appear to ignore these things and only really kind of promote forms of trade or bilateral ties with what it classes as its BRICS partners, even though there's no real trade coming to and from those entities. So the Afrikaans leaders committed to informing the South African government and the public of these conditions in order to promote transparency and working towards restoring strong bilateral ties. So here it is, ladies and gentlemen. I've told you and we now know. So what's the South African government likely to do? Well, for me personally, I think nothing. I cannot see them agreeing to any of this because that's just the way they roll. Now, you see, in other news, a top US diplomat for Africa dismissed claims of unfair trade tariffs targeting African nations and clarified that the tightening visa rules were not meant to hinder initiatives like the Lobito Corridor Railway linking Angola, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that there were no current plans to defund the project. But you see, they said that the whole point of the project is basically to foster trade between nations, because that's what the United States says they want now. They don't want to do aid, they want to do trade. They say we've been giving aid to Africa for the longest time, and it's not working. What needs to occur is we need to foster trade. Now, according to them, the railway linking these three countries will foster trade, hence they will continue to fund it. And this is an important element of the Trump administration, because Trump's administration wants to promote trade. Everything is trade-centered. Now, this could also be seen in the whole Starlink scenario, because as you will know, there is this whole draft equity equivalence regulations which should be put forward, and this would effectively allow Starlink to get a license in South Africa by meeting the Black economic empowerment obligations through investments, supplier contracts, and job creations, rather than a mandatory equity transfer, which I think all of us would say, well, that's a much better approach. Now, as you will know, this was put before Parliament, and all the usual commie suspects blew their mind and said they didn't agree with it, it was racist and whatever else. And it's important to recognize that these draft regulations are available for the public to comment on. And while critics allege it's tailored towards Starlink itself, the actual officers are saying it's not. It's actually a broad-based policy shift. And so this may be the start of a BE policy shift in South Africa, which would be great. Somehow I doubt it. That's just my personal opinion, but maybe I'm just really jaded by the news. In other news, the Israeli embassy. So Paul Mashatile basically confirmed why they hadn't yet shut down the Israeli embassy, and that the reason for this is because they want to retain the embassy for diplomatic engagement in the region, and closing it could result in Israel reciprocating, ultimately locking South Africa out of the region. Yes, you arsetards, this is the reason we have embassies full stop. It's to keep you engaged with the embassies and the regions as a whole, and just shutting them down because you want to be a commie arsetard is just not a good idea. It's dumb. Now, talking of pressure on the government that's maybe getting a little bit too much for them, this is the news that the national dialogue, which is estimated that is going to cost us 700 million to basically allow Ramaphosa to bust people into all these various talks, and talks are wonderful, the ANC is, and for them to re-steer South Africa's policy in a way that they want, saying that they actually got the mandate through the dialogue. But the way they're going to do this is using the taxpayers' funding. So the whole thing is nefarious as hell. In any case, given the actual pushback against Ramaphosa has said that he would reduce the costs. Now, what he will actually reduce the costs to, we don't know. But I suppose it's at least a good start that he can see the writing is on the wall. People aren't very happy that he's going to use taxpayer money in order to fund his next election campaign. And that's my view on it. I made my views on the entire dialogue very well known. And on to a very final news story of today. And this is the news that Ramaphosa is expected to reshuffle his cabinet. Now, it's really important to recognize that the time of recording is the 26th of June. This is a video for the next day, so you will be watching it the day after recording. And to be frank, the reshuffle may have already occurred. I don't know, because they haven't actually announced when they're going to do this reshuffle. And if it's, Ramaphosa doing what he usually does, well, it will be manada. It will be whatever he feels like it. But in any case, the current news is that the DA's Deputy Minister, Andrew Whitfield, who's the Deputy Minister for Trade, may be losing his job, with the DA expected to lose one of his Deputy Minister positions. So will this cause tension with the GNU, and would it lead to an actual DA fallout? Or will John lose his job as Agricultural Minister and be moved somewhere else? Well, we don't know any of this. But still, it's very important to note that a reshuffle is expected to occur, with the DA set to lose one Deputy Minister position. So is this the start of disputes in the GNU? Don't know. Anyway, these are all my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until later, bye.
When I was an extremist, Islamist, fundamentalist, I would only vote left.
Why is that?
I saw them as very stupid. I would fear the conservatives because they come with principle. That's not someone they can brainwash. But the left, I know they have no values and no principles to begin with. I dare you to find one Islamic extremist that votes for Donald Trump. Never do it. They'd give their vote to the leftist who wants to run around in pride parades. And Islamic extremists are against gays and homosexuals and transgenders, but they want the left to go and get busy with that. They want them, go speak about the climate, go speak about abortion, go kill yourselves, go do that. Ilhan Omar, she's fighting for abortion rights, and all the other, my body, my choice, yes, go do that, But would she have an abortion? Never. Never. Would she kill a Muslim in her stomach? Never.
What is the fundamentalist and jihadi agenda for America?
The future of America has to be Muslim.
Well, this is what I find so amusing and tragically amusing about the left, who are always the great anti-imperialists,
Yes.
Forever condemning Western imperialism and colonialism, and yet, of course, Islam is the great imperial colonizing religion. It's in its blood. And, it was only in the 1970s that you got this nonsense that Islam means peace. There was historically, there was never any association between Islam and peace. This was done in the 1970s to try to make Islam more palatable to naive Western liberals who fell for it and welcomed the idea in. But of course, if you want a clue about what Islam is, just look at the etymology of the name Islam. What does it mean? Submission, right? This is about submission. The only way peace is associated with Islam is when the entire world submits to Islam. Then the world will be at peace because everybody will have converted over. But apart from that, it's utterly an imperial invention, started, from a very small location, and it's spread globally. And of course, the goal of many is the caliphate, to restore the ancient system of government that ruled the Islamic world. And of course, remember, that went into Spain and to Portugal. They see Europe very much as their entitlement. They're trying to do it here. You know, to name drop again, but my ancestor led the right flank of the cavalry at the siege of Vienna in 1683, which stopped the Turks from attacking Europe and invading Europe. And that was the last time that Islam threatened Europe, was in 1683. And we've had 300 years of complacency since then because, of course, nobody took the Islamic world seriously because it wasn't an economic challenger to Europe. But we forgot about the centuries of war that existed between this great clash of cultures, this clash of civilizations, and we became too complacent, we became too sure of our own security and safety. That applies to all of Europe, but that also explains, of course, why Central and Eastern Europe is so opposed to mass immigration, why places like Poland haven't taken in refugees from this part of the world, because they and the Hungarians and the Romanians, they know full well what it's like to face Islam.
I've read the Quran, and what I see there isn't fundamentally a religious book. It's a manual for conquering other people's countries, and wherever Islam has gone, it has what's been called by historians bloody borders. It rubs up against other cultures. You can't have Islam and democracy.